Land Conquest in the 20th Century, Soviet Union and Nazi Germany's Fight for Control in Poland, documentary by Brian Yu. So the research question is the ways Poland was depleted during and following the end of World War II and how it led to the Soviet Union incorporating it as a satellite state. The thesis is that the violence the Soviet Union resorted to in the name of geopolitical interest, along with Polish war casualties during German occupation and during the Warsaw Uprising, weakened Poland, enabling the Soviet Union to seize political control. Right, and to give more background, Poland was first occupied by the hostile forces in Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union in 1939. This is followed by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression pact lasting 10 years signed by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. This was broken in 1941 by Nazi Germany through Operation Barbarossa. During Nazi rule, thousands upon thousands of important members of society, including professors, political leaders, clergies, nobles, and also civilians, were murdered to accommodate the Nazi Germany's idea of a pure race and to prevent Polish insurgency. The Warsaw Uprising occurred near the end of the German occupation in 1944. This military insurgency lasted from August to October in 1944, and it aimed to assert political dominance and to discourage Soviet government intervention. This operation ended in defeat with an estimated 18,000 members of the Polish resistance killed and around 200,000 civilians killed, in addition to the destruction of Warsaw, the city itself. Many blamed the Soviet Union for the defeat. They halted their forces right across the Vistula River and effectively denied Allied aid to Warsaw through closing their airstrips. Now to the left is Stalin and Ribbentrop, the German signing with the Soviets. And to the right is the Home Army soldiers surrendering to German troops. So now, viewpoint 1. Alluding to the period during German control. So, German arrested leading members of the community as hostages, shooting most of them almost immediately. Polish universities, polytechnics, high and middle schools were closed down, and the professors, assistant professors, and other faculty at the Jagiellonian University were deported to the Sachsenhausen in November of 1939. A Polish historian estimates that 172,000, 189,000 and 215,000 ethnic Poles were dead in the general government by the end of 1939, 1940, and 1941, respectively. In the German action A-B carried out in May-June of 1940, thousands of educated Poles were murdered. Of those, 3,500, including some prominent politicians, were shot in wood near the village of Pomry, just south of Warsaw. So to frame it differently, the Nazi army arrested people within the Polish population and took them as hostages only to kill them shortly after, without justification. The crosshairs are focused on elite members of society, those who are knowledgeable, and those who are leaders. The Nazi regime chose to eradicate these people due to their zeal to purify the racial makeup of Europe, but also to stifle any attempt and possibility at an insurgency against themselves. This devastated the Polish population, as cities and towns are now finding themselves in a cycle of finding people out for jobs in the government and in schools again and again. Some schools closed down altogether. This, in addition to devastating the Polish morale, also eliminated any chance at an uprising, causing a shortage of leaders and soldiers capable of resisting outside government intervention. To conclude, the German occupation of Poland lessened their resistance against any outside power interfering with their government. This is exemplified in the Warsaw Uprising, as the desperate Home Army tries to take a stand against the German army before the Soviet arrived to assert themselves politically. Now, viewpoint 2. So, it's now August of 1944, and the Polish Home Army, which is abbreviated to AK, has initiated the Warsaw Uprising. However, their bucket loads of logistical difficulty as the underprepared AK attempt to fend off the German army before the arrival of the Red Army. Following the numerous requests to help the Warsaw insurgents from the Allies, the American ambassador in Moscow replied that the Soviet government cannot, of course, object to British or American aircraft dropping arms in the regions of Warsaw, but they decidedly object to British or American aircraft landing on Soviet territory. And the Soviet aircrafts, which had already been present in the early days of August of 1944, disappeared from the skies of Warsaw. Soviet generals halted their troops within a few miles of the city and held their position for most of August. So, first, the Soviet Union prevented the Allies of Great Britain and the United States from landing in Soviet soil. This meant that the supply planes will have to fly from Brindisi, Italy, which is more than 1,500 miles away, and a plane have to fly over German-occupied land. Because of this, only 199 aircrafts took off from southern Italy between August 4th and September 21st, and only 87 drops were completed. Of these drops, the Polish insurgents only received 58 of them. A different source suggests that one bomber was shot down for every 1 ton of supply dropped, causing a halt in supply runs during mid-September. The Soviet ground troops also halted their advance, which meant that in the period between August and October of 1944, the Polish Home Army fought alone, except for the occasional aid they received from the Allies. So most of this can be avoided had the Soviet Union cooperated with Poland and the Allies. And as a result, an estimated 200,000 civilians died during the Warsaw Uprising, in addition to 18,000 dead or missing and 25,000 wounded among the Polish resistance army. This greatly weakened Poland and opened a window for the Soviet forces to seize control politically. And so they did, first with the London government in exile and later with the Lublin government. Viewpoint 3. So, after Stalingrad in late 1942, Stalin not only began to impose his wishes regarding Poland's post-war frontiers, but also did his utmost to destroy the London Poles, eventually replacing them entirely with an alternative communist leadership, which took over and transformed Poland on his behalf at the end of the Second World War. FDR and Churchill wished to establish a genuine coalition at the end of the World War II of these three groups, which would administer Poland provisionally until such time as free elections could be held. Stalin and Molotov refused. Lublin, which the Soviet Union already recognized over Western protests, should be regarded as the legitimate provisional government, they argued, because it was functionally effectively and enjoyed broad support among the Polish people. So Stalin stacked the London Poles, the Polish government in exile since 1940, with loyal communist followers so that if it returned to power, Poland would be more politically aligned with the government in Moscow. This shows their willingness to hold the Polish people hostage and instill a communist rule, exemplifying their geopolitical interest in Poland. The London government in exile was also caught short-handed in the beginning of the occupation of Poland. It relocated to London shortly after the beginning of the Second World War, which meant that Poland was governed remotely to some degree. In the ensuing years, the government remained in London, giving the Soviet Union more direct claim to Poland via the government in Lublin, a government closely aligned with Communist Russia, whom they recognized over Western protests. In the end, Stalin ignored the compromise coalition agreed upon following the Yalta Conference and helped set up the Provisional Government of National Unity in Warsaw, which was practically communist. Soviet influence was solidified with the Polish United Workers' Party, and Poland would be communist for more than 40 years to come. Alright, here's my annotated bibliography, which will be linked. Thank you.